In this video, we're going to look at some HTML and JavaScript, and we're going to have a button, which we've considered previously, and then we're going to add in a text input. And the events we will consider are the oninput events, and we will do that by using an oninput attribute, but also addEventListener. And then we will also look at a number input. So what to do if you're if what the user is going to enter is number. The code for this example can be found at the URL seen here. Okay, so I'm going to work in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to close that and then reopen it. I want to work in with the LiveServer, and to do that, I'm going to open the folder where the file I'm interested in is, and that was in downloads. And then here is the Explorer, and here text input is the file I'm interested in. But working this way with the folder is going to allow us to use the LiveServer. So that was an extension that I had previously installed. So under extensions, there is a LiveServer, and I have it installed. LiveServer, and there it is here. I've already installed that. Okay, so I can right click and say open with the LiveServer. And right now I have it on the default, and I'm on a Windows machine. So the default is Edge. And this is the text input. It allows me to enter text. And I have I'm going to enter a name. And the browser was remembering some names I've previously put into this page or other pages. And so I'm putting a name and click a button. But if I if I edit this text, if I change the input in this text, it's going to clear out, put in these X's. So there is the button click event, but there is also sort of an event associated with typing here. And I'll copy that for a reason. So I'm going to say here, Betty, and hit the button. And it says, hello, Betty, and hello, Betty. And I can also paste, and that is an event that also clears. And then down here, this is a number input. And so I'm typing away. I don't know if you can hear that typing, but I was typing away, but I was typing letters and they weren't being accepted. But if I type numbers, they will be accepted. So, and we're not doing much with this, but if you say you worked a lot of hours, I say you're working too hard. And if you put in negative hours, I say, please put in a positive number of hours. So there's a little bit of logic, not much. It's mainly about the events. Okay, what else to show you? I'm going to show you the code, but still playing studio games right now. Visual Studio Code games. It was opening it in Edge. That can be changed. So I can go to File, Preferences, Settings, and I was using the LiveServer, so I can see what settings there are for LiveServer by performing a search. And here is the custom browser. So it was null, there was no setting. And then I can say, let's choose instead Chrome. And now I can go here and open with LiveServer. And now here, this is Chrome. So that's where I have my email and such. So I've switched the browsers. Okay. So now let's start looking at the code here. I don't need the Explorer. I'm just going to be looking at this one file. Don't need settings anymore. Don't need get started. Okay. So I have an HTML document. The head has a title. There's a style. It's red with gray writing. I am down here styling multiple things, a div, an input, and a label, and giving them all some margin at the top. So a little bit of space around it, and an inline block display type, so that they can share that line with other things. I gave the inputs. The inputs are both the buttons were inputs and the text and number were all inputs. So I gave them all the same width. I had some things called labels. I gave those widths, which I can do if I've assigning something a width connects with this sort of inline block display style. And I can specify, I can distinguish between the button and the text type. And I think I forgot to put in the number. I also have a number type. And so here is specifying, so I can sort of specify a tag with a particular attribute. So here's a particular styling of buttons, and here's a particular styling of text inputs. Okay, so that's style. And again, we have this nice collapsing feature in Studio. So I'm not interested in the style anymore, so I can close that off. I have a label and an input. So the label just says name, and then there is a text input here. So it's an input. I give it an ID so I can access it in code. It's of type text. And then I have an oninput attribute, which connects it to the handle text input event one function, which I must define, and it's defined below. And then I have the button, which is button click one, which is a type button. The value is what the button says. In the text input, the value is what the user types, but in the button, the value is what sort of we as designers have typed. And the button has an onclick event, calls a different function. And then here is a div to sort of change the display based on the user's actions. Okay, so let's look at that function. Here is some code which is disabling the button, or sorry, enabling the button by setting the disable property to false and clearing out the div results. So if I refresh the page and come and execute the script code, and this is not in a function, so this will get executed sort of as soon as we get to the bottom of the page. This is the last thing on the page, div, the third button, and the place to enter the hours. That was the bottom of the page. So this gets executed at the bottom of the page and clears out anything that might have been there. And here's the click function, handle button one, and I'm declaring that there is an input. So let is the keyword for declaring a variable. JavaScript is sort of an old language, and you can sort of get away without explicitly declaring a variable. You can also use an older keyword, var, and it has different sort of scope properties to the newer declaration of let. So most sort of modern programmers will prefer that you use let and have the more the sort of scope behavior that's more in line with most modern languages. I'm going to get that value for that variable from the page. So that's document.getElementById text name one.value. So the document refers to the page, the web page. It had a bunch of elements. One of them had an ID of text name one. It's case sensitive, that matters. And what's written in a text is known as this value. This is what the user wrote, and that becomes the user input. If the user input, if the user didn't type anything, then, and so the string input is equal to quote, quote, then we're alerting to say, please enter some text and return. We haven't been very careful. They could type space, which is probably not a proper name. But so long as they've typed something, we're going to accept it. But if they type nothing, we're going to alert a message up and return. Return means sort of get out of this function. So I won't execute anything below this point in the function if the user input was quote, quote. There's an alert. Then is that pop-up that we saw? There was something in the console, which I wasn't showing, but I can. So let's show that. I'm going to open again with the LiveServer, and I'm going to do an inspect. Here's console. The inspecting looks a little bit different in Chrome versus Edge. But if I type over here, Fred, and click the button, then here's my alert. And here is my console. And then here is me editing the page, and I'm disabling the button. So we can see all that here. Here's my alert. Here's my console. Here's me changing something on the page, the inner HTML of the div result 1. And I'm concatenating here. I'm adding the user input name to this one and hello. Okay, so in JavaScript, plus sort of serves a dual purpose. It will do addition and it will do concatenation. And so in this case, there's no problem, confusion. Sometimes there can be. So that's something to be careful about in JavaScript. Okay. And then here was the input event. And the thing about the input event is it's any change in the input. So that can be a mouse event, as I showed when I was running it the first time, that it was in the second box, and I'm looking here at the first box, but they're coded similarly. I pasted in a name. So there are mouse events, and there are keyboard events, and there are specific things in keyboard events, whether the key is going down or whether the key is coming up. But this sort of simpler input event is just some change in the value of the input, of the text input. So if they type in the box or paste a new entry in the box, I'm clearing out any previous results of my div. So I'm putting in a bunch of X's, and I'm re-enabling the button. So they may have previously clicked the button and I disabled it, but if they're changing the data, I'm clearing out the answer and then allowing them to click the button once again. So right now the button is disabled, nothing's happening. You can see, remember there was a console event there and nothing's happening. So, but if I change the name, then that re-enables the button. So now I can press it and I get my alert and I get my console log. Okay. The second button and the second text box and the second button are just to do this other approach where instead of up in the first example, we had an attribute on input and on for the text input and an on click for the button. And that's how we connected to our functions. In the second example, we do not have those. So there's no sign of any JavaScript. I mean, probably wouldn't have a button without it involving some JavaScript, but there's no, or it might have some other language like PHP or Python or what have you. Anyway, so, but there's no sign here of connection to some JavaScript. We're going to do that purely within the JavaScript. So that is, let me close what we've sort of considered. We've considered those. Here is this is code that gets executed. It's not in a function, so it gets executed when we reach the bottom of the page. We are enabling the button click if it had been disabled for any reason, and we are clearing out any answer. We are also adding a click event for the second button, and we're adding an input event for the second text. And these are going to do what the other ones did. So the difference is more of this addEventListener versus the oninput or onclick. So this is just a different way to connect code to elements. So document.getElementById, button click to, addEventListener, what event to click, and what do you want to do about it? Go to the function handle button to. Same thing for the text input, but this time it's an input event, and go to a different function, handle text input event 2. Okay, so here's handle button 2, basically the same code as the other handle button, but it's just being sort of the connection between code and page are different. Same thing for the input event. And again, the input event handles both some mouse events and some keyboard events. So it's just a very simple, nice, sort of all-purpose event for the input being changed. Okay, so for the third button, the change, it's a different type of input. So the text input here is of the number type. So if you recall, when I was interacting with the interface, I was typing letters and none of them were going in. But if I type numbers, they went in. It also accepted, I entered a negative number, so it accepted a minus sign. So that's something that a number input accepts. It's not a number, but it's part of a number. And things like perhaps a comma or a period, those things might be accepted. And then it might be anticipating that you're entering a number in scientific notation. And in computers, I think that usually involves an E, so it'd probably accept the letter E. So there are some things that it'll accept that you might not think of first as numbers, but they can be part of numbers, and so it will accept them. Okay, but there's no, again, we're working with the, not the on input or on click here. We're going to be working with the event listener. So here's third sort of set of things: enable the button, clear out the div results, add a click event handler, and add an input event handler. A click for the button, an input for the text. And then here's the function called by clicking the button. We're going to get a variable for the user's hours. We're going to get it from the page. And now, while the browser, when you say that the input is of the number type, will only allow you to write things that are connected with numbers, and you don't have to write that code, that happens automatically. What comes in is still, in terms of JavaScript, typically a string. And so if you want to force it to be a number, then we do this parse float. So that is going to emphasize that I need to interpret this, and I use the same variable name. So I'm just sort of emphasizing here that whatever I brought in, I'm going to interpret as a number, and then I'm using the same variable. So this should, at this stage, be understood by the program that it's a number. I ask if for some reason it's not a number, I sort of yell and get out. If the number was less than 0, I sort of yell and get out. And this, if I hadn't done the parse float, then these conditions of being less than or greater than something can be a little confusing, because it might want to be so comparing a string and a number, and then it might give you some weird interpretation. So you want to emphasize that this is a number and let it be treated as a number. So less than is a numerical less than, greater than is a numerical greater than. And I have an alert. I didn't do any console this time. I display a thing and I am disabling button. If they type in the box for the number of hours, I'm clearing out any result and re-enabling the button. And then I don't know when I was starting down here in 175, but I never finished it. So that should just be commented out and not used. So that's what I wanted to show you. So thanks much for your attention.